So I am Deborah Bronk. I'm the president and CEO of Bigelow Laboratory, and I want to welcome you to the first event of our Café series for this summer. Bigelow, for those of you who don't know, Bigelow is an independent nonprofit research institute that was founded back in 1974 by Charlie and Clarice Jentsch. And Clarice Jentsch is here tonight. You got to stand up and wave. This is a big year for us because this is our 50th anniversary year. And so the theme of the four talks that we're going to have this summer are all about the 50 years of research at Bigelow. So currently we have about 120 full-time staff. In the summer we've got a bunch of interns and we've got some visiting scientists, so we go up to about 150. Our funding comes primarily about 80% from the federal government through contracts and grants. And then about 20% comes from philanthropy. So we have a lot of our donors in the audience right now, and I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you to all of them. We could not do what we do without you. I want to give a special thank you to H.M. Payson. H.M. Payson is a Maine-based financial advisor, and they have been supporting Café Sci for many, many years, and we are very, very grateful for that. And I also want to, again, give a call out to Kathy Sherrill and her team at the Opera House for stepping up and giving us a place to do this. And I'm going to tell you in a little bit why we are here instead of on our Bigelow campus. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Barney Balch. Barney is now an Emeritus professor. He retired last September after 28 years. 29. Not that he is a detailed person. So Barney received his PhD back at Scripps Institute of Oceanography, which some of you may have heard of. He is a phytoplankton ecologist who has made just some incredible contributions to what we know about biooptics, satellite oceanography, remote sensing. He is a wonderful mentor. He is also a very accomplished jazz trombonist who I have seen perform on this stage, I think twice. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Barney Balch.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay. Well, thanks to the folks at Bigelow for inviting me to speak now that I'm Emeritus. Okay. My talk begins here. I was 14 years old when this picture was taken. And this is the year that I first became associated with Charlie and Clarice Jentsch. Lest you think that as a 14-year-old I knew anything about the field of oceanography, you would be woefully mistaken. I was just a kid who needed some braces. A little more background about me. In 1972, when that picture was taken, I was too young to be employed by the University of Massachusetts Marine Station. And you're probably saying, UMass Marine Station, I thought this was about Bigelow Laboratory. Well, Bigelow Laboratory, I see the kernel of Bigelow's beginnings actually when they were at the UMass Marine Station in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And I was too young to be employed by the University of Massachusetts. And so Charlie Jentsch made me a company called Balch's Visual Aids. And I would go in after school, and I would sit in front of the microscope, and I would count phytoplankton. I had a little clicker. And as soon as I counted so many hundred, then I'd put on another slide, and I'd count them, and I'd write all this stuff down. And which is why I wear glasses today. And just so you know, that is an original, that is a purchase order that Balch's visual aids submitted. This was now to Bigelow Laboratory. This was submitted in 1978. I was still working under the Balch's visual aids. And that was a check for $30.80 for, I don't know, 30 samples or something that I counted. And I have a little timeline at the bottom of my slides just to keep you aware of where we were in time. A little bit more background about me. So I've told you at the UMass Marine Station, I was working there after school between 1972 and 1974. The lab then moved up to, as Bigelow Laboratory, up to West Boothbay Harbor, Maine. So in my high school and undergraduate years, 1974 to 1980, that's the red arrow on that timeline, I was working summers, and I took some time off from my undergraduate to go to sea. What a great opportunity. And then I was in graduate school from 1980 to 85. I did a couple of postdoc positions after I finished at Scripps, and then I became a professor in 1988 at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School. And I have a boldface thing under there. I actually officially was connected to the lab in about 1992 again as an adjunct scientist. Bigelow figured out that coming up from Miami was pretty sweet in the summer. And so we would come up to Maine. We actually purchased a small house in Maine to use as a summer place. And that started this relationship, a later relationship with Bigelow as an adjunct scientist. And then I was a senior research scientist from 1995 to the end of 2023. And then I retired at the end of 2023, as Debbie said. That's that exclamation point in that slide. So I see 10 key ingredients to the success of Bigelow Laboratory over the last 50 years. There are more than that, but there are 10 key ingredients which I think are absolutely critical to defining what Bigelow Laboratory is. The first is a compelling and evolving mission, which I'm going to tell you about. They're also scrappy attitude risk takers, I call them. The people at Bigelow were well aware of risk, but they took risk to make the institution work. Scientific freedom, independence, people make the place, educating the next generation, creativity, we are family, tenacity and teamwork, and finally, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I'm just going to go through these. And to come up with this talk, I went through 50 years of annual reports and other documents from Bigelow Laboratories. So compelling and evolving mission. In 1974, that is the copy of the annual report from 1974. The mission statement was that oceanographers of the disciplines of physics, chemistry, biology, and geology must work together in concert, their focus being the sea as a unit. Exciting and fruitful research results from discipline interactions. And then on the bottom of that is Bigelow's mission statement now, which is different, but in some ways there are some similarities. Our mission is to study the foundation of global ocean health and use our discoveries to improve the future for all life on the planet. The previous mission was talking about the sea as a unit. Down in the lower one, we're talking about the global ocean. So there are some similarities there. Now let me tell you a little bit about the scrappy attitude of risk takers. The founders, Charlie and Clarice Jentsch, were the epitome of scrappy in a good way. And the predecessor to Bigelow Lab, as I said, was the University of Massachusetts Marine Station. And from 1970 to 1974, they were in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And how scrappy were they? They were so scrappy that when they arrived at the UMass Marine Station in 1970 and they couldn't move into the laboratory, they found an old church up the hill, and they went out and bought some 4x8 sheets of plywood. They clamped them to the pews, and they put all their scientific equipment on that. in order to be able to do their work. And I was also told by Clarice that they used the stained glass windows in the church to give different chromatic light coming through for the cultures. Pretty scrappy. There's another, and here was the annual report from 1972. There's a boat on the left-hand side there, which is the RV Bigelow. How scrappy were they? The University of Massachusetts didn't really want to buy a research vessel, but they had some friends said every lab has to have a research vessel, so they started a nonprofit in order to buy the Bigelow. And the Bigelow ultimately went up to West Boothbay Harbor, Maine. Another scrappy person was Spencer Apollonio, who lured Charlie and Clarice to Boothbay in 1974. And where was he luring them to? He was luring them to a federal lab, which is at the end of McCowan Point, where that big arrow is, which had been vacated. It was a hatchery, and it had been vacated, and Spencer, who was the Commissioner of Marine Resources, wanted to have someone in that lab, and it was a great opportunity. So he came down and sold this to Charlie. And the moment when Bigelow was founded is actually described in one of the annual reports. And I'm going to read you 3 paragraphs that Charlie wrote, which really say it all. And pardon me as I read this. It was a lead gray day of early spring. The State of Maine float plane circled a rocky cove at Ipswich Bay and landed on the dark waters next to the University of Massachusetts Gloucester Marine Station. Spencer Apollonio, Commissioner of Maine's Department of Marine Resources, his deputy, Dick Choate, and warden pilot Don McIntosh stepped from the plane. Spencer was smiling. "The news from Governor Curtis is good," he said. "From that moment, I knew the decision was mine." So Charlie went on. Oh, and this is the picture of McCowan Point where the previous federal lab was. I found it in a postcard from early 1960s, I think. And you'll see the caption on top. It says, "Fish hatchery in West Boothbay Harbor, Maine, from the air," as though this is a picture from the air. It's a drawing. At any rate, Charlie went on to say, if I, Charlie, said yes, it would mean that Spencer might achieve his goal of combining basic research plus resource management into a holistic ecological approach to fisheries. State acquisition of the retired and vacant federal McCowan Point property would also be justified for such a research effort. If I, Charlie, said yes, I might achieve my goal of placing my basic research efforts within the context of fisheries oceanography. The answer, of course, was yes. I would have to resign a tenured professorship at the University of Massachusetts and move 15 people and considerable equipment and supplies. So the last paragraph, this is the RV Bigelow. And Charlie said, "It's a straight shot from Cape Ann to Boothbay Harbor by water. The small RV Bigelow purchased for our use by some friends from Cape Ann was readied. Boxes of chemicals and laboratory hardware were stowed on deck and within its hold. A truck was hired to carry the more delicate instruments, and on July 1, 1974, the vessel arrived at the Federal Wharf in Boothbay Harbor. The laboratory was now Bigelow." And I have to add, because I was actually there that moment in July 1, we were schlepping these boxes off the RV Bigelow up to the lab, and there were boxes everywhere. It was one of these stinking hot days like we've had here. And at 3 p.m., Charlie said, "Okay, everything's going to stop," and he started digging around through some boxes, and he pulled out a box which had a bottle of whiskey in it and a couple of Dixie cups, and he filled it for all of us. I was too young to drink, of course, and passed them around, and we all toasted to the beginning of Bigelow Laboratory, July 1, 1974. And so the last thing I want to say about scrappy attitude of risk takers. The world of soft money in science involves inherent risk. If you don't get a proposal funded, you don't get your salary and you don't eat. And there are few givens in the world of soft money research funding. But when Patty Matrai and we were hired at the same time at Bigelow. We were touring around through the lab. This is in 1995. Bob Guillard, who was the person who started right there, he started the culture collection. He basically said this. He said, senior scientists at Bigelow Laboratory are like fighter pilots. They like to fly low and they like to fly fast. And it keeps you on the cutting edge, but when there's an accident, it's not pretty. So I took those words very seriously, but it's the sort of risk that is involved in coming to a soft money research institution. And as long as Bigelow has existed, there have been naysayers. And I will say a personal case in my situation, I was getting ready to leave Miami, and a person at the National Science Foundation, for whom funds come to do research, came up to me and said, why are you leaving the University of Miami and going to Bigelow Laboratory? This is 1995. He said, Bigelow Laboratory won't be there in 5 years. Yeah, and I'm not going to say who that person was because Debbie knows everybody there. But I'm glad I didn't take his advice. Scientific freedom. Bigelow works on a model similar to a Maine lobsterman's co-op. We work under one roof, and we get our electricity and our water and our lab space and such. The lab uses a percentage of the revenues to run the co-op. And individual scientists act as a business within a business. The scientists provide scientific direction of each lab. They write proposals and budgets to federal agencies and foundations. They hire people to do the science. They write reports, peer-reviewed papers for the literature, present results at meetings. They're audited and they complete work under federal and state laws. And they strategize, very importantly, they strategize jointly for the future of the lab. We all sit around a table when we talk about what's happening and what's going to happen at the lab. And Charlie, in one of his annual reports, this is from 1979, he asked, why do people do basic science? And the answer is freedom, he said. The unknown is, of course, a vast wilderness as compared to the known. Scientists can arrange their own time schedules and are in reality their own boss. Most would argue that creative activities in general require this kind of freedom. Like most laboratory directors, I spend much of my time trying to ensure that people have this type of freedom, as I'm sure does Debbie Gronk. Independence. Bigelow Laboratory started in '74, as I said, as part of the Northeastern Research Foundation Incorporated. And I said, who is the Northeastern Research Foundation? And this gets back to the scrappy part of this, because when Charlie and Clarice were bringing the lab up to Maine, they had federal grants from the Office of Naval Research, from the National Science Foundation, etc. And in order to bring those grants, Bigelow had to be a nonprofit. But Bigelow, it takes years to get that nonprofit status. So and this was Spencer's idea, Spencer said, I know of this inactive nonprofit, it's called the Northeastern Research Foundation, made up of professors at Bowdoin, primarily, but others as well. And if you look, and Valerie at the lab showed me the notes from this organization going back to the 50s. They were active up until about 1964, and then they just became inactive. I figure it was kind of like a gentleman's smoking club, and they all decided, yeah, enough of this. So then in 1974, Spencer says to Charlie, let's tag on to the Northeastern Research Foundation and use them as the springboard, and then in a couple of years, Bigelow will get their own nonprofit status. So that's how that actually came about, and that's a very important piece of the puzzle. Today, it's an independent private nonprofit organization, 501c3. It has held affiliations and collaborations with various private colleges and universities. I list a few of them here, the University of New England, Colby College, and the Rue Institute, for example. People make the place. From the earliest days, there was a focus on bringing the best minds in the business who would flourish in this rural setting. January and Maine is not necessarily for everybody. Here was the 10-year picture of the lab in West Boothbay Harbor. And here they were in 1999 for the 25th anniversary. And then here they are for the 40th anniversary. And now they were in front of the new laboratory. A little bit more about People Make the Place. Charlie had a comment in his 10-year report, and he said, "The real success lies in an excellent scientific and support staff, nurtured an atmosphere that promotes interaction, cooperation, and genuine curiosity about each other's work, operating within an administrative structure designed to serve and promote the science, not to impede it." And educating the next generation. When Bigelow was founded, there were few federally funded programs to train undergraduates in marine science, or high school kids like me. Instead, the lab hired college students and high school students with a real stipend and trained them to work in the lab and at sea. We got to go to sea. It was fantastic. And those, it's not much different than what we do now, but we do it in a much bigger way. Bigelow Laboratory has it's called Research Experiences for Undergraduates, and they do many things more. They design experiments, they generate hypotheses, they do the experiments, they then work up the data, they present their results to us. It's a much more formalized operation, and it's fantastic. It's really wonderful. High school students come to the Keller Bloom program, which will be 35 years old next spring. 35 years old. There's one student from each county in the state of Maine who is brought to Bigelow for a week to go out on a boat, gather data, work up the data, and present it at the end of the week. So there have been hundreds of students through both of these programs that have matriculated. The Sea Change semester in residence, which was originally started with the Colby Partnership and now includes institutions, colleges from all around the United States. Postdocs, we have a number of postdocs that come for training after their PhDs. We have a postdoc training program and a professional training programs, like we bring in teachers, teacher training programs. So there's the timeline for the educational part. The red, solid red portion of that is when Bloom started, will be 35 years ago, and the hashed lines there in the arrow are when the Bigelow Research Experiences for Undergraduates program started. And, you know, oh, here it goes, there we are. Here is an example. This was the first class that came through the RU program in 2009. Here's another one from 2010, and I'm just going to flip through these, 2012, and you just get an idea of the sheer numbers of students that have come for this 10-week program. They're fantastic. It's very competitive to get in, but these kids are utterly fantastic. And yes, during COVID, it was even done. And this brings us up to this year's class. Creativity. Creativity and entrepreneurship are the bedrock of Bigelow Laboratory's success. And I list a whole bunch of facilities, science centers, and analytical services. I'm not going to read them down here. But I will say that the top one, PFAS testing lab, PFAS are these forever chemicals. Christoph Apley at Bigelow has just started this PFAS testing lab, which is testing now from samples from all these different environments, looking at the levels of these. These forever chemicals are everywhere, and there are health ramifications of their presence. We are family, and with apologies to Sister Sledge's song of the same name from 1979, The scientific co-op is like a family. The administrative structure is relatively flat. I say relatively. We have a director. Even from the early days, there was a director of research, and now we have some other directors, but generally it's pretty flat, which is one of the reasons I wanted to come to Bigelow. We all wear multiple hats to carry out the science and the committee work, which is really important. Our joint success relies on the success of the individual labs. So, you have to get those grants funded. At our monthly meetings, though, we sit around the table, we debate the directions of the laboratory, we argue like family members, we bicker like family members, but it's all in the name of science. Tenacity and teamwork. The building of Bigelow Laboratory has required extraordinary teamwork by the directors, scientists, board members, administration, agencies, and elected officials over these last 50 years. I can't say that strongly enough. There were many setbacks, but the tenacity of the institution has prevailed. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you some of the mile markers past the founding of the lab. This is 2002. This is the site of the East Booth Bay property, which the lab was able to purchase. Here's the board. Sandy Sage is there on the left, and they're pounding in a stake where the first building was going to be. That was 2002. Graham Shemield came on board in 2008. Here he is posing in front of the Alvin submersible. And he was brought on because he had built a laboratory in Scotland. And so the board really wanted to take advantage of that. And so here's the first building that was planned by Perkins and Will, the architects. And I know the people at Bigelow are probably looking at this and chuckling because it looks so small compared to where we are now. But there are many lines of that building which are similar. That was finished in 2010. It was finished in 2010 in the fall. The groundbreaking was in the fall of 2010. And it was made possible by the Maine Technology Asset Fund, People of Maine, and philanthropy. This is the second wing, which came about partially through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. We all wrote this proposal together. I remember vividly doing it. And it is the Center for Ocean Biogeochemistry and Climate Change. And that science facility was completed in the summer of 2012. The third wing, which is leftmost in this photograph, was supported by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It represented the third phase of the new campus and was completed in November of 2012. It included a dock and a shore facility, which I will show you here. The dock and the shore facility is right down here, and there's the shore facility. This picture is from about 2018 or 19, and over here on the left is Shemield Hall, our residence hall, which was completed in 2017. We stand on the shoulders of giants. Sir Isaac Newton was quoted as saying, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Certainly, the founders of the field of oceanography in the 19th and 21st centuries, everything we're doing now goes back to those very initial discoveries that were made. The directors, scientists, and staff who have built and maintained this organization, Bigelow Laboratory, for the last 50 years are giants in my view. The current and former board members and supporters are giants in my view because what they put on the line. And I'd say, and especially Henry Bryant Bigelow, our namesake. And there's Henry Bryant Bigelow. So in conclusion, and I'm going to read through this. This is Charlie Inch's words from 1974, the first year that Bigelow was founded. The oceanographic philosophy of Bigelow was that oceanographers of the disciplines of physics, chemistry, biology, and geology must work together. Sound like that mission statement? Their focus being the sea as a unit, and that exciting and fruitful research results from interactions, discipline interactions. When given the opportunity of forming this laboratory and pressed for the need to name it, I could think of no person who represents more of all that is genuine and meaningful in oceanography than Henry Bryant Bigelow. He went on, I do believe that Bigelow would be honored and proud to be identified with an oceanographic laboratory whose philosophy advocates that life in the sea can only be explained by a unified effort on the part of physical, chemical, geological, and biological sciences. And I would add to this, and to use our discoveries to improve the future for all life on the planet. And I'd like to acknowledge a couple of people who helped with this presentation, hearing it with information: Patricia Matride, Debbie Bronk, Clarice Yench, Jennifer Cutshall and Valerie Young, Leah Campbell and Joe Ambrosino, who have done the sound and helped edit this talk, and Bigelow colleagues who listened to a previous version of this talk and freely offered lots of commentary. Thank you very much.
Okay, please join me in thanking Barney. All righty, so Barney just told us about the last 50 years, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what to expect in the next 50 years. This is a topic that's really been consuming me of late because we are just ending a very successful strategic plan that was written shortly after I arrived. And now the staff and the board and myself and the executive team are all working on putting together, what's the next strategic plan. And as I contemplate this, one of the things that's front and center in my thinking are, what are humanity's great challenges? And one of those great challenges is the 590 billion metric tons of carbon that are in our atmosphere right now. A good chunk of that carbon we have added to it over the last 100 years by burning fossil fuels, which move that carbon from deep in the earth into the atmosphere. And humanity, not just Bigelow, not just the people in this room, but humanity in general, desperately need to do two things. One, they need to draw down some of those gases from the atmosphere, things like carbon and methane. And the second is we have to stop putting so many back up into it. The second big challenge I see coming at us is that we need to figure out how to feed 8 billion people. There are 8 billion people on this planet right now. I thought we were still in the $7 billion people range. We're now over 8. And we want to feed people a diet where they can thrive, and that means high quality protein. Now, I think the two most valuable tools we have in our arsenal to do both of these things, to address these challenges, are first the human brain, and second is the ocean. And where do those things come together? Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences. So in the coming years, I really want us as an institute to double down on the Bigelow model, which Barney has been describing, and I'm going to describe a little bit more as well. Because I've worn a lot of hats in marine science at the national level over the years. I've volunteered for a lot of committees. I've done a lot of site visits. I feel like I have a really good handle on how science is done around the country. And hands down, the most efficient model of getting science done, especially transformative science, is Bigelow. So as Barney said, we are independent. We're not part of a big institution, and this allows us to be nimble. Right? We can pivot on a dime if we have to, and we did during the pandemic. We were one of the marine labs, and there weren't that many in this country, that never closed down. We're a lab that's run by scientists for scientists. Like, think of how this place evolved. I mean, for people that want to do creative science, Bigelow is a wonderful, wonderful place to spend your time. Grants and contracts, the scientists getting those grants and contracts keep the doors open. As Barney said, they rely on each other to get funded, because if they don't get funded, we don't have the money to run the place. That is a genius approach in many ways, because the collaborative nature of the Institute is something, again, I have not seen in other places. They rely on each other, so they help each other. There's no tenure. You cannot rest on your laurels at Bigelow Laboratory. You got to bring it every day, and they do. And as Barney says, we are not afraid to take chances and to fail. And that's important, because I think that's something as a country, we are getting more conservative in our science as budgets get tighter and tighter. And you got to go for those moonshots, or we're going to turn into a mediocre second-rate science country. So in the next 50 years, I really want to double down on this model that they've built. Now we're here tonight because our campus is under construction. This is a picture of a rendering of the new Center for Ocean Education and Innovation. In the next 50 years, I want this place and Bigelow Laboratory to be a destination for scientists to come. We're going to be well positioned to host workshops, small workshops and conferences. Right now, as a scientist, I go to a number of small towns for these workshops. I want them here. They're going to bring new ideas to the scientists at Bigelow. They're going to bring business to the town, and it's going to help to send out the ethos and the culture that Bigelow has really built over the years that's so powerful for science. And then there's the work we do here. And it falls into three categories: discoveries, solutions, and inspiration. I'm going to go through those. So at Bigelow, we're all about the discoveries, right? And for the next 50 years, we'll continue to push that envelope to understand our ocean and the potential in three major areas, which are our big themes. The first is our changing planet. So what are we dealing with out there? Now, for example, we've got scientist Steve Archer is here. I saw him. So we've got scientists that work in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and they're trying to understand how is the planet changing and how are those changes going to affect the global processes that we all depend on. Then we've got ocean health and function. So with those changes, we're stressing marine animals, marine organisms. And that's when you get disease. So we've got scientists working to understand the spread of marine diseases, like epizootic shell disease in lobster, because these are the kind of things that are going to impact humanity's ability to feed those 8 billion people. I'm having a unit issue right now. And then I think, which has really been the bedrock for the science we're doing right now for a while, is the ocean's potential. If you think about every drop of seawater, there are millions of algae, billions of bacteria and viruses, and each one of those organisms has its own genetic code. When you think of the information that is encapsulated within those cells, it's mind-boggling. If we can capture that, understand, and harness it, the sky's the limit. It just represents extraordinary opportunities. So now over the last decade, we have spent, as a laboratory, putting the cultural change and the structure in place to really think about turning those discoveries into solutions. And I think the next 50 years is going to be really working to get those projects over the finish line, to continue to put in place what we need to mobilize what we're learning in a way that can benefit all of society. So for example, we've got projects to prevent harmful algal blooms. Right now, harmful algal blooms make people sick or kill people. They ruin property values. They cost this country billions and billions of dollars. What if we can nip them in the bud? And right now, one of our scientists has an idea that is one of the most exciting things I've heard in a long time, because I used to work in this area. It's depressing. We got an idea. I think we're gonna make exciting progress. We have another big project that many of you have heard about because we've given talks on it. Let's stop methane coming out of cows. Cows are burping methane right now. So that's, right, one of those two things we got to do. We got to stop putting up these greenhouse gases. Another project is using microbes and microbial consortia to convert CO2 into rock. That's the other side of that. That's pulling it out. Now, for any of these things to succeed on a scale that's large enough that we can really have a tangible benefit that can change the concentration in our atmosphere, we're not going to be able to rely solely on the federal government or philanthropists. We're going to have to rely on the market. We're going to have to make things in such a way that people want to buy them. They want to spend the money to do this because they get benefits. But before we get to that point, what we desperately are going to need is the philanthropic support to get us through that valley of death, we call it. It's from the idea to the point that you've got a prototype that investors want to finish in. So the next 50 years, we're going to get some of these all the way across the finish line. And last but not least, we need to focus on developing that most important tool that we've got, and that's our brain, to solve all of these problems. And we're going to be doing this by producing, both within our staff and within our students, resilient thought leaders who aren't afraid to fail. And so Barney mentioned that. That is so key. As a president of Placer, like, we fail. But it's true because we're willing to take the risk to do that. And I want to interrogate that sentence a little bit. First, focus on resilient. So right now, we are all around the country. One of the things I'm very concerned about is we've got a lot of students out there that are lacking resilience. The pandemic was hard. Kids' lives got turned upside down. And what I'm seeing now in universities around the country is we're trying to accommodate and help them and get them up to speed. And one of the things I'm worried about is we are starting to make the preparation for a career in science easy to the point that we're not preparing them for just how hard it is to be a researcher. So we've got to really think about how do we produce resilient students that can handle the failures that come with it. So when I talk to interns and I'm walking down the hall and say, how's it going? And they're like, this is so hard. And I'm like, good. Right? Because that is good. Because when they're at Bigelow, and for our scientists, I hope, what we're trying to build is this culture of support where that, yeah, it's hard, but we got your back. We're going to figure out how to do this together. That's the culture we need to export to other places and to really protect at Bigelow. So then the focus on the thought leader part. So I see so many of my colleagues that are really mired in university bureaucracy. They're mired by incredible teaching loads, which impacts their research. Not that that's not important, but when you're thinking about trying to get research done, heavy teaching loads can be brutal. Or they're forced into these siloed thinkings just because of the institutional structures they're part of. None of that is at Bigelow, right? Our largest project, we're trying to find enough cows. Okay, we don't have any silos. We also attract rebels. Now, I used to say this in the beginning because this is something that struck me, and I got away with it because some people were like, dude, that doesn't sound good. It is good. We attract people like Barney Balch that is like, why are you giving up an untenured job? Because he's a rebel. He wants to take this on. He wants the freedom to follow his science. He's a thought leader, and this is something we need to encourage, not to think the way other people think all the time. We want to encourage that in our students, and we want to encourage and support our scientists. One of the ways we need to do that is to provide them the financial support to get out there when they're asked to be on a national academy, when they're asked to testify before Congress. We want their voices out there on behalf of all science. And then finally, who aren't afraid to fail. And we need to really stay true to the culture in our staff and our students, that we are not afraid to fail. So last Friday was a bummer. It was a bad day. We found out that we did not get a $24 million grant. Now that's a bummer. On the other hand, the chances of us getting that grant were not great to begin with, right? Because competition is stiff, that's a lot of money, but that is actually a triumph because the scientists that worked together over the course of weeks to envision a $24 million project that would have advanced science across many disciplines, that's huge. And if we were too afraid to fail, we never would have done it. They never would have done it. So yeah, I said, go out and drink too much and eat too much and come back on Monday and it's going to be okay. Because we've got to have people that are willing to take that on. And one of the things I loved, one of the people involved with that was Melody Lindsay, and I saw her yesterday, and I said, how are you doing? And she was like, about what? I said, about the proposal not getting funded, and she was like, oh, I've already tried to figure out, a number of ways I'm going to rip my part out and send it somewhere else. Those ideas did not get funded collectively in one grant, but they're going to get funded other ways, and that is wonderful about Bigelow. And again, when students complain that their experiments don't work, I don't always say this because I don't want to make them cry, but I'm thinking, good, because they will learn so much more from trying to figure out why it didn't work than they will ever learn from a well-designed, sanitized lab manual that works every single time. So luckily, most of the ethos and the culture that we need for these next 50 years is already baked into Bigelow's DNA. It's been there from the beginning. Here's a shot of, I think I counted around 60 people. So this is half of our current staff. It was taken about a month ago. I hope you will join me in supporting the work that these people are doing. One, be an ambassador. There's still people just in this town that really don't know what Bigelow's about. Talk about Bigelow, talk about the work. And we need the financial support to do a lot of the work that we're doing. Federal grants just don't pay for everything. A lot of foundation grants now, they're so great for the science, but they somehow assume that we're supposed to operate without paying an electric bill because they don't give you any overhead. The financial support that so many of the people in this room have given us is absolutely critical. We are limited by financial resources. We are not limited by ideas and drive. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I can't wait to see what this amazing group of people come up with and the discoveries they do as they really go after some of these grand challenges. I'd be very happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks for your time.